Great, thank you, Rose. Again, this is Dominic Holtz. Rose Hennessy is our maestro on all things technical, and Ian Henderson is also here in the room, helping out, managing questions. I will try to talk slowly, even though that's not my natural speed, and hopefully the internet will cooperate with us to improve our sound quality. Okay. As we go through the presentation, you will see many places or text that looks dark and underlined. That text is hyperlinked. You won't be able to click on it today, unfortunately, but when we put the webinar up online and the PowerPoint as a PDF, you will then be able to go through it and click on those links and access the information I have hyperlinked for you. That'll be helpful in many regards, and you'll see as we go through. All right. First, before we get started, we're going to ask folks to click on the link in the chat box. Great. Okay, so thank you, Rose. She just pasted into the chat box a link to a very, very brief survey or poll that we'd like you all to take just a few moments now to complete, because that will help inform our conversation today, as well as future technical assistance and advocacy planning here at WCASA. So again, if you could go to the SurveyMonkey link in the chat box there, or you can type into the URL of your web browser, the URL link on the screen, and just take a couple moments to answer those, just a couple questions. I'd greatly appreciate it, so we'll give folks just a little time.
Okay, and just to clarify for folks, this is what you should be seeing on your screen right here. So there's 3 quick questions, and if for any reason you're having a hard time doing that, you could also just read these right now and put that in the chat. But we prefer that you go to the poll so that we can see all the answers combined.
Great. All right, we're going to move on to the next slide and really begin the webinar. Thanks, everyone, for completing your poll. If you haven't already done so, please feel free to do so throughout the rest of the webinar. A little bit of a disclaimer here. It's not showing up quite the way that I had formatted, but the presentation provides some legal information, but it really does not constitute legal advice in any way. Each organization should adopt policies and procedures, only after obtaining approval from the appropriate folks in your organization. That might include the board of directors or an attorney, etc. I bring this up because we will be discussing lobbying, etc. Okay, great. So first, we're going to talk a little bit about the governor and the new legislature. I was just checking on how my image is obscuring some of the text. It looks like that might occur throughout the webinar. I thought I was using the most recent software, but perhaps not. So, the political context. As you know, we have recently had an election. Governor Walker has been reelected. Some analysts say that the governor's run for the presidency has helped motivate what he recently introduced as his budget proposal, which is particularly conservative-leaning, and basically he's proposing a variety of budget cuts. For example, among others, he has proposed a $300 million cut to the University of Wisconsin system. Everybody knows that in the Madison area, but that's just one of the areas that he is looking to reduce the size of the budget. Also, as you probably know, the elections favored Republicans, who strengthened their majority in the legislature, they continued to control both the Senate and the Assembly. Many in the majority party, that is the Republicans, favor less government and more budget cuts. So, you know, all of this taken together, we generally know that it was expected that we would have a downward pressure on the budget this year. Add to that the expected $2.2 billion budget shortfall in the states. You know, we knew budget cuts were going to be proposed, and that's why we've been working awfully hard on the budget here at WCASA. In terms of legislation related to sexual violence, this is the legislative landscape. There's already been significant movement on something called upskirting, an upskirting bill, if you will. This is an attempt to bring the law up to date with technology, ever-changing technology like cell phones, and iPads, and whatnot, and how that applies to sexual violence. The bill would make it a crime to essentially take images of parts of the body that are clothed by undergarments, etc. This bill started out quickly and already passed the Assembly. It is now slowed down in the Senate. This is Assembly Bill 8 and Senate Bill 4. That's just one example of some of the issues being considered at the legislature with regard to sexual violence. There's also continued interest in the legislature on mental health reforms and human trafficking. All right, so in our next slide, we're going to talk about a little bit about agenda setting. I came on in September of 2014 as a public policy and communications coordinator, and this was the first time that we had, well for many years, an in-house lobbyist who was focused only on CASA work. And so one of the first things that we did as an organization was do our best to respond to what we heard from members, which was a real need for increased communication and transparency. So responded to some of those concerns in October. The public policy team at WCASA invited members to serve on a membership-based public policy advisory committee. In addition, we now use a highly transparent process for setting our public policy agenda, and that process is described in the public policy agenda itself. There's an image there of the new public policy agenda. You can click on the link when you're able to access the PDF version of this webinar, and that'll take you to the agenda. The agenda is also available on our state public policy web page, and there's a link to that also at the end of the webinar. Late last fall, the Public Policy Advisory Committee completed a survey. This helped inform this new agenda. In December, the committee held a kickoff call in which we reviewed survey results, the committee's roles and opportunities, and the new agenda for the new legislative session. In general, our hopes with the advisory committee are as follows. We'd like to facilitate two-way communication between WCASA and members. We'd like to increase members' collaboration with WCASA on engaging the media and state lawmakers in policy work. We'd like to identify and address barriers that members experience regarding policy advocacy. And in general, we'd like to inform the public policy work of the coalition. The public policy agenda is broken up into different tiers, 4 of them actually. Perhaps the most important tier is Tier 1, as you might expect, which we call leadership priorities. These are the ones in which WCASA works to become the recognized leader in the state. WCASA considers these issues the highest priority of the public policy and communications coordinator, me. We will ask members to focus much of their advocacy on these top priorities. And what are those? Well, you see right there that There are 3 of them, and the first one is increased funding for the Sexual Assault Victim Services Grant Program. We refer to this as the SAVES program. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. Second is the victim accompaniment legislation that we worked on in the previous legislative session. We're going to be, we already are working on that now, meeting with legislators and moving forward. Third is public reporting of data. We're advocating for an annual public reporting system of data related to sexual assaults. This could include reporting such as reporting on sexual assaults to law enforcement or arrests, referrals for prosecution, convictions, these kinds of things. SAVES funding. SAVES was level or flat funded in the governor's proposed budget, which he released very recently. In other words, he has proposed that the legislature fund SAVES at essentially $2 million annually, which is the current funding level. WCASA would like to see funding for the program at $4 million annually. We've been meeting with folks in the legislature as well as in the governor's administration to advocate for this increased funding. And we will be working with you on encouraging the Joint Finance Committee in the legislature to increase funding for the SAVES grant program. Why the Joint Finance Committee? Well, the Joint Finance Committee in the legislature is the next body to basically consider the governor's budget proposal. And things really get moving after that. So we're going to want to weigh in with those folks, especially if your member, if one of your state senators or assembly persons serves on that committee. You can see here in dark underlined, help us prevent rape. That's our budget request or our budget handout paper. We'd like to share that with all members of the Joint Finance Committee. It lays out our argument for increased funding for SAVES. So who's on the Joint Finance Committee? Those folks, to answer you. Again, those are active links that you'll be able to access. Oh, beautiful. And in the chat box, Rose has put in links from the budget agenda and the Help Us Prevent Rape budget handout. Great. Okay, so you can access those links immediately via the chat box. Thanks to Rose Hennessy. Well done. So just take a second, if you would, to look at that list of the folks who serve on the Joint Finance Committee, just to see, do you know any of these folks? Any familiar names? You can also see, generally speaking, the areas that they represent, like River Hills for Senator Darling, the co-chair. You know, do any of those areas sound local to where you live? Now, to really figure out who represents you, you can go to the legislature's website, and specifically to this page. And again, that's a link, find out here. And you can type in your address in the upper right-hand corner, and or you can click on the red districts and zoom in to find out who represents who and where, and etc. This is crucial information that we at WCASA use daily when we are reaching out to folks. Beautiful. This link is also now available immediately in the chat box. Everyone has one state senator and one state representative or assembly person, which you may already know. Okay, if possible, we're going to look at poll results, specifically for the accompaniment portion, which is the third question on the poll. Rose is working to see if we can do that. Basically, that question was, what kinds of challenges have you or your staff encountered when accompanying victims through the medical and criminal justice systems? We're interested in knowing what you've experienced or heard because this will help inform our work in terms of our discussions with legislators and their staff and agency officials, and specifically help us with crafting the very details of the legislative language for this bill. Great. So essentially, we haven't had a whole lot of folks take the survey. So please, if you haven't already, oh, okay, you don't have to do it right now. Sorry, that might.
Put it in the chat if you're fixing it.
Right. Okay, put it in the chat. She's saying, put in the chat if you would like the answers to the poll questions at this time if you have not already taken the survey. But so looking at the results we have now, it looks like 50% of folks say that they have, oh, actually, hold on, let me look at the third question. I'm looking at the wrong question. Mm-hmm. There we go. There are 4 responses to the accompaniment question. I'll read them. We have, oops, maybe not. Just a second. Nice, okay. We haven't really had any experience with this yet. We just started 3 months ago, but hope to have some experience very soon. Fantastic. We would love to hear your feedback as you do get underway with that work. Law enforcement not engaged and not calling for advocate response. Victims have had to travel to find a sexual assault nurse examiner. See, none. Not being called until the interview is almost complete, not being called at all. Okay, those are some themes we've heard before, and that's very, very helpful. Now we need to get back to the slides. Just take a moment. Fantastic. Okay. All right. So next, influencing public policy. Thank you for staying with us. I know that sometimes public policy is not the most exciting thing in the world, although I tend to think so. But now we're really getting into the nitty-gritty here. 2 primary ways of influencing public policy are by communicating with lawmakers and their staff directly, and by communicating with and through the media to help affect the public debate, to help inform lawmakers, etc. Now, why you? Public policy significantly influences the work that we all do in the anti-sexual violence movement, especially you folks on the ground working with people. Public policy shapes victim rights laws, as you know, funding for victim services, which we've mentioned, and how our communities respond to offenders. So when the voices of survivors and advocates, service providers, and allies aren't heard, the quality of our sexual assault laws and policies suffer, and suffer a great deal. Public policy makers need informed input from you in order to develop and implement sound sexual assault policies. Without your input, frankly, they're moving blindly. They need your information. They need your insight and hands-on experience to make the best possible policies for victims and service providers. In fact, your involvement in policy advocacy is really a key factor as to whether or not our communities have laws and policies that treat victims with dignity and that prioritize and value the vital roles played by service providers. And I apologize for the strange change in the formatting here. I'll correct that for the PDF on the website. But communicating with lawmakers, the ways to engage lawmakers include the following. And there are many more, but we're just going to go through some of the most important ones. First, Legislative Advocacy Day. We really would love participation from all of you in Legislative Advocacy Day. If you haven't heard, this is when folks come to Madison on March 25th, not 21st, to discuss policy priorities, our public policy agenda, and to meet with their legislators about those priorities, and to really raise your voices, your concerns, your insights with those folks, so that we can create informed and effective public policy at the state level. Also, conducting other visits with your legislators or their staff at the Capitol or in your districts. That means, back locally at home. Testifying at hearings. That's a huge, important piece of policy advocacy and communicating with lawmakers. Again, an excellent opportunity for you to raise your voice and share your insights. And same with speaking at listening sessions or town halls. Some of you have already begun this. Legislators are beginning to hold town hall meetings or listening sessions at public libraries or wherever in their districts to hear from you and other constituents about what they should basically be doing in the new legislative session. Speaking of which, the Joint Finance Committee plans to hold numerous hearings again this legislative session. We don't have all the details yet, but we understand that in mid-March, the committee says it's going to have a hearing in Fox Valley, in the southeast of the state, the southwest of the state, and in the northern region. In April, the committee says it anticipates holding hearings in Madison. Again, opportunities for you to come and raise your voice. We'd like to hear from folks and organizations interested in speaking at any of these events because we can certainly help with talking points and other resources. All right. Continuing on this path, you can also invite lawmakers to tour your organization, to come speak with your staff, learn about what you do, the importance of your work. Certainly, you can also respond. We hope that you will respond to our action alerts when we develop and disseminate those to you, saying please send a letter or an email or make a call to your legislator or engage in our social media campaigns.
We had a question. When is the hearing in Fox Valley?
Unfortunately, Joint Finance Committee has not given those details yet. I haven't seen them, so we don't know yet. We're going to obviously keep our eyes out to find out when that is and let you know. Thank you for the question. All right, now the second part of communicating effectively or policy advocacy is communicating with the media or through the media. There are two pieces to this, at least two, and it's a very important part of advocacy. A, achieving positive coverage, what you might call earned media, regarding anti-sexual violence work, regarding your work, etc. This can significantly impact public debates on public policy matters, as I mentioned. Also, legislators and their staff often monitor their home newspapers and other media outlets concerning their pet issues or legislation or policy that they're working on to know what constituents think, to hear, basically how they're doing. So we can inform them indirectly through media. It's also important to think when considering media work, how can folks respond as quickly and effectively as possible to media requests. In other words, when a journalist or a reporter calls your agency or sends you an email and says, we'd really like to interview someone or speak to someone there on background about such and such matter because something is in the headlines or is going to be in the headlines, if possible, it's always best to try to respond as quickly and effectively as you can. And if you can't offer an interview for whatever reason, certainly trying to provide them with other resources is a great way to build a relationship or maintain a relationship with them. And of course, we'd like to try to generate positive media coverage whenever possible. I'll talk a little bit about that. So achieving positive coverage for media. Some of the main ways of doing this include drafting and disseminating press releases, letters to the editor when you see something in your local newspaper or state-level newspaper that you really want to respond to or should respond to regarding sexual violence, as well as drafting your own op-eds. These are, as you may know, opinion articles that are basically mini essays they're larger than letters to the editor, and you submit those to your local paper, and hopefully the paper picks it up, runs with it. Also, many news websites do this now. It's a great way of getting your insight, experience, and voice out there for lawmakers to hear, and the general public at large. There's a lot of work that needs to be done to help inform, educate the public, and this is an excellent way of doing so. Also, building relationships with reporters, not that you have a whole lot of time, but certainly responding when you can to media requests, providing resources, or referring them to someone else, to even us, WCASA or another organization when appropriate. That helps build relationships. Hosting press conferences and other media events. Folks sometimes do this when they have maybe a new program they're launching, or they've received a grant to do something very noteworthy, or they just want to bring attention to the issues that they are seeing on the ground, etc. That's another excellent way of communicating with the media. And pitching to reporters. Now, what I mean by that is not necessarily baseball, but it's very similar. Proactively contacting reporters and encouraging them to write about your or our policy priorities. And then responding effectively to media requests should include granting and managing interviews, but on an informed basis. In other words, when you do get requests from media about, hey, we'd like to meet with you, we'd like you to go on record, we'd like to interview you, what have you, it's always important to decide what is best for your organization. If you're able to provide background or on the record information to them, that's fantastic. And then actually managing the interview process can be tough, but important. Watching what you say, preparing before the interview with talking points, deciding who's going to speak, what you're not going to speak on, all those sorts of things. And as I've mentioned before, providing other resources if you've decided that an interview is not possible or not in your best interest. These are all things that we here at WCASA would like to provide technical assistance on in the future, including, of course, technical assistance on legislative advocacy and public policy substance, so that we help you all be as effective as you possibly can when communicating with legislators, your staff, and media. Poll results. We're going to take another moment to bring up poll results, especially on the first two questions. The first one, as you can see, thank you, Lily. What kinds of policy advocacy activities have you done or engaged in, whether this be with legislators or the media? Okay, so looks like 75% of respondents have held meetings with lawmakers or their staff, called lawmakers, which is great, reached out to reporters proactively. Half of respondents participated in Legislative Advocacy Day. That's great. I'd love to drive that number or percentage up to near 100%. Everybody involved, because you all are really the important folks when it comes to changing public policy. Let's see, writing constituent letters, it's great, 50% there. Speaking at listening sessions in town halls, 50% building relationships with reporters. It's fantastic. All of that is really important. As long as you're doing something to engage in policy advocacy, that's fantastic. That's better than not doing something, obviously.
And since I know that we had that up in the beginning, if you could do us a favor and right now write in the chat, which one of these things are you most comfortable doing? Which one of these items do you feel the least comfortable or have the least amount of experience engaging in? And on the positive side, we also had someone say meeting with lawmakers and staff, touring our agency, and preparing materials for meetings and media. On areas where we feel less comfortable or have less experience, We include press conferences, press interviews, testifying at hearings, and holding press conferences again. Thank you so much for your feedback.
That's great. Thank you. Now, we're going to take a look at poll results for the second question. What kinds of training or resources would you find most useful in these regards? Obviously, this builds or is related to the questions you just answered from Rose. 80% of folks responding said, preparing for and holding effective meetings with legislators or their staff. Would love training or resources on that. 80% also speaking at listening sessions or town halls. And then 40% calling lawmakers, testifying, planning social media campaigns, press conferences, media events, etc. Apparently nobody wants resources or training on proactively reaching out to reporters, and that's okay. Reporters can be scary. Or on drafting and disseminating press releases, letters to the editor, and op-eds, or touring lawmakers through your agency. I guess that doesn't take a whole lot of resources, but that's helpful. Thank you.
There's one comment on other.
Oh, fantastic. One comment is they would like Legislative Advocacy Day information. Okay, we will get that information to you just as soon as possible. We are going to actually meet this coming week with folks at NWCASA because we put the Legislative Advocacy Day on with them, and we are going to be looking at the actual specifics of that event soon. Okay, so, okay. Again, I apologize for the strange formatting. We will fix that. So, a word on lobbying. Lobbying is a bit of a gray area because federal and state rules regarding lobbying are very complex, or can certainly seem that way. In fact, the IRS in some ways is quiet on some specific issues of lobbying. In general, nonprofits can lobby, but there are limitations. So please read the fine print, if you will. It's up to each organization to know what your grants say regarding lobbying, so be sure to check out your grants. And it's up to each organization to consult the resources we've provided here and others as you see fit, such as the WCASA Guide to Nonprofit Advocacy, a link to state law and rules regarding lobbying, and then at the bottom, Boulder Advocacy. That is an excellent link, actually a link to an excellent resource from the Alliance for Justice. They do a lot of work, including technical assistance for nonprofits across the country. They even have a hotline you can call with questions and answers and such about what kind of lobbying you can do, even about how nonprofits can participate or not participate regarding referenda, ballot initiatives, election matters, all sorts of important information that I think you'll find really, really helpful. You also might need at times to consult an attorney or other folks in your organization to really decide what lobbying-related activities you will pursue, etc. Okay, great. Here we are. So for more information, we have a link to our past webinars on the legislative process, a link to the state public policy page on the WCASA website, which has recently been updated, or at least that policy page has been. As you may know, we are planning a new website in the future. We hope that will be even more accessible than the current one. There's also a link to the Wisconsin Legislature there on the webinar, which is a fantastic website. You can find out who represents you, as I mentioned before. You can find out what bills are before the legislature. You can find out all sorts of important information, as well as a calendar of events, like when a hearing is coming up, etc. And then there's contact information for me, in case you do not already have it, including links to the website, our Facebook page, and our Twitter. Follow us if you haven't already.
And we have a question. What practical tips do you have for hosting press conferences?
Well, that's something that we could probably talk more in depth about offline, but in general, it's all about preparation. You want to manage your time very effectively. You want to do a lot of outreach to get reporters there. When you do it is important as well, like what time of day, what time of the week. With respect to the news cycle, you want to select your speakers very carefully. You want to really script what you're going to say, and then what kinds of questions you'll be ready to answer and what kinds of questions that you may not wish to answer, and prepare a way to pivot, if you will, away from those questions. You'll also want to think about issues relating to, like, what is your overall goal for the press conference? What are you attempting to achieve? And that's something we talk a lot about here in WCASA in terms of everything we do. Try to be strategic. What are we trying to achieve? If it's just increased news coverage on our issue, okay, that's pretty broad. We need to narrow it down, and the more focused you can be on the goal, the more focused you can be on your strategy and your tactics, and the more effective you can be. So I think those are some very broad tips. I hope they're helpful. Maybe any follow-up or related questions?
Are there any resources that you recommend or you could send out afterwards about hosting press conferences that detail some of the more minute details?
Sure. Why don't I send those out? I will do some research and find what is the most helpful, and I will share those. Again, this is a great time. I have flown through our slides with or without formatting problems, and we have a lot of time left to chat, to entertain any kind of questions, etc.
When you are thinking of hosting a press conference, you mentioned that at WCASA you are strategic about being specific on that topic. How do you help narrow down what topic to be focusing on?
Well, with regard to like having a media event or a press conference, are more likely to come as a reporter or as a community member if the topic is very timely in terms of related to what's going on in the media, So, hi, how are you? This is Dominic. So, whatever you can do to try to figure out, what is the reason for having this press conference, the better. If it's to, for example, highlight maybe a new program that you're launching, then that's very specific, and people are more likely to say, okay, I want to learn more about that, I want to attend that. So especially reporters, the more specific you can be, the better, and connect it to why this is important. Maybe it's a campus sexual assault program, for instance, and you can tie that, the need for such a program, you can tie that to all the really terrible things we've been hearing about campus sexual assault for a long time, and especially in the headlines recently across the country. So any way you can kind of make a media hook to your press media topic or press conference topic, the better, because when you call reporters and say, hey, we're going to have this press conference, we'd really like you to come and ask questions, cover it for us, you're going to have to say why. Like, why should they invest that time? Well, because we understand that you've written about campus sexual assault, or your paper has, or campus sexual assault has been a huge issue in the state papers recently because of X, Y, and Z, and this is what we're doing to try to fight it, and we just started this project, blah, blah, blah. So that's kind of one example kind of off the cuff there in terms of trying to be specific because you're pitching the reporter in that instance, and you're also going to be pitching community members. You're going to be trying to encourage community members to come to check out the press conference or to check out the video of the press conference afterwards. You want to think about that. Like, how are you going to capture that event so that it is accessible and you can leverage that later on, ideally via the internet? Are you going to have news cameras there? In other words, are you going to try to get a TV station to come and cover? Press conferences can be hard, and they can take a lot of staff time. So I would say be thoughtful about whether or not you're going to have one and whether or not you're going to spend the resources and the time to put one on. And then obviously be thoughtful about how you go about doing it so that it can be a hit. Other questions or thoughts? Okay, here's one. In terms of planning a social media campaign, how can we really aim for broad impact on a limited or no budget? Well, that's the beauty of social media and many other pieces of the internet. You don't need a huge budget or much of a budget at all to impact the conversation online. What you do need is basically a computer, a link to the internet, and some knowledge of the social media medium that you're using, whether it be Facebook or Twitter or Pinterest or any of the others, and do some research about, well, what are the best practices in trying to start a big conversation, for instance, on maybe child abuse or on sexual assault, what have you, and then move accordingly. Some of the fun things about social media also make it very, very effective in terms of reaching lots of people, such as thinking creatively about hashtags in Twitter. That's the number sign, if you can already know that, in front of a term or a couple of words that are joined together, such as hashtag sexual assault with no space between. You can think creatively about what kind of hashtags can I create or think of, and then do some research to see who's using that now, because the idea of the hashtag is to help connect you to other people communicating about the same thing and to help broaden that spider web, if you will, of communication. So those are just some examples of how you can try to plan and think about ways to make your social media that much more effective. And obviously, when we're talking about a campaign, we're talking about something specific. Maybe we're trying to encourage the governor to, or the legislature to increase funding for SAVES. Then, you want to think about what kind of messages should we craft that we want to share and that we want amplified throughout social media. What would be appropriate? What is the tone of the message? Do we want to thank the governor for level funding the program, or do we want to encourage legislators to increase funding? And how do we do that? Do we appeal to their sense of morality, because it's the right thing to do, which is always helpful, or do we maybe use statistics or research to try to make the case? And how you do that through social media can be tricky, but also kind of interesting. You only have 140 characters in Twitter, and you don't want to make your Facebook post that too large. We were sharing some notes across. So those are just some initial thoughts. Other questions?
It looks like we have one that's coming in. Just give us a second.
Great. And again, thank you so much for everyone for staying on and asking questions. Okay, the question is, come in. Here we are. What are some of the most important things to remember when testifying? Good question. Good question. Well, initially I would think, you're going to be on the record, so you want to prepare well what you're going to write, what you're going to then read. You want to do your best to not read in a mechanical manner, so you want your presentation to be somewhat personable. But really, I think more importantly, you want to think about what you're willing to go on record saying, because this is something that, as testimony, that you are sharing with the legislature, for instance, and that will basically go online, I presume, and will be used as an important tool to help affect public policy for the better, we hope. So, I think you would want to think very, again, strategically and thoughtfully about what are the most important things to say, and how can we basically use whatever talking points or other resources here at WCASA to help you. And even we could do mock testimony and mock answer question. I know at the federal level, I've spent most of my career working in DC, and the question and answer period is a big deal when giving testimony. I presume it's also that way here in Wisconsin. I've seen that in Michigan in my time there. So we could prepare for those kinds of things, much like a press conference, really. Having your talking points, if you're better with talking points than reading a script, preparing for what are the likely questions and how would you like to respond to those or not. One of the things I hear repeatedly is how important it is to hear real-life stories whenever it's possible about what people go through and what is really important for people to have available to them, such as your services, your personal advocacy, et cetera, to make it through these very, very difficult times in their lives. So personal stories, whether they be from survivors or from service providers, allies, we all, as you know, generally know someone who's been affected by sexual violence. Those kinds of personal touches are infinitely important and really have a profound effect on legislators, especially when we talk about things that can seem kind of dull or cold, impersonable, like dollar signs, So bringing the human factor back to the conversation is critical, and you all are well adept to do so, given your work, your experience. So that's something that's important. Any other thoughts from Rose or Ian? Other questions, or are we just about to call it? Looks like people are ready to end the webinar. We thank everybody for participating. Again, we will get the YouTube version of this online as soon as we can. Oh, it looks like it'll take 2 weeks. Well, certainly we have a little bit of work to do on the formatting, which was an odd surprise given how much time I put in formatting. We'll also put a PDF version of this, as I've said, online so that you can access those URL links and more easily maneuver the issues that we've discussed. So thank you again. Thank you, Rose. Thank you, Ian. And we look forward to talking with you all again. We will have more webinars in the future regarding public policy advocacy, media advocacy, and related matters. And again, please contact me if you have questions or specific asks. We really want training on this. We really want technical assistance on this. That's why we're here. All right. Thank you so much. Have a great day.